Mozambique, Portuguese, Moambique, pronounced Muzbik, Chichewa, Mozambique, Swahili, Msumbiji, Songa, Muzamhiki, officially the Republic of Mozambique, Replitsa de Moambique, pronounced Pulik Muzbik, is a country located in southeastern Africa bordered by the Indian Ocean to the east, Tanzania to the north, Malawi and Zambia to the northwest, Zimbabwe to the west, and Eswatini and South Africa to the southwest. The sovereign state is separated from the Comoros, Mayotte and Madagascar by the Mozambique Channel to the east. The capital and largest city is Maputo. Northern Mozambique lies within the monsoon trade winds of the Indian Ocean and is frequently affected by disruptive weather. Between the 7th and 11th centuries, a series of Swahili port towns developed on that area, which contributed to the development of a distinct Swahili culture and dialect. In the late medieval period, these towns were frequented by traders from Somalia, Ethiopia, Egypt, Arabia, Persia, and India. The voyage of Vasco da Gama in 1498 marked the arrival of the Portuguese, who began a gradual process of colonization and settlement in 1505. After over 4 centuries of Portuguese rule, Mozambique gained independence in 1975, becoming the People's Republic of Mozambique shortly thereafter. After only 2 years of independence, the country descended into an intense and protracted civil war lasting from 1977 to 1992. In 1994, Mozambique held its first multi-party elections and has since remained a relatively stable presidential republic, although it still faces a low-intensity insurgency distinctively in the farthermost regions from the southern capital and where Islam is dominant. Mozambique is endowed with rich and extensive natural resources. Notwithstanding, the country's economy is based chiefly on fishery, substantially mollusks, crustaceans and echinoderms, and agriculture, with a growing industry of food and beverages, chemical manufacturing, aluminium and oil. The tourism sector is expanding. South Africa remains Mozambique's main trading partner, preserving a close relationship with Portugal with a perspective on other European markets. Since 2001, Mozambique's GDP growth has been thriving, but the nation is still one of the poorest and most underdeveloped countries in the world, ranking low in GDP per capita, human development, measures of inequality and average life expectancy. The country's population of around 30 million, as of 2022 estimates, is composed of overwhelmingly Bantu peoples. However, the only official language in Mozambique is the colonial language of Portuguese, which is spoken in urban areas as a first or second language by most, and generally as a lingua franca between younger Mozambicans with access to formal education. The most important local languages include Songa, Makua, Senar, Chichewa, and Swahili. Glottolog lists 46 languages spoken in the country, of which one is a signed language, Mozambican Sign Language, Ingwa de Sinais de Moambique. The largest religion in Mozambique is Christianity, with significant minorities following Islam and African traditional religions. Mozambique is a member of the United Nations, the African Union, the Commonwealth of Nations, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the Community of Portuguese Language Countries, the Non-Aligned Movement, the Southern African Development Community, and is an observer at La Francophonie.
Etymology.
The country was named Moambique by the Portuguese after the island of Mozambique, derived from Musa bin Beek or Musa al-Big or Mossa al-Beek or Musa ben Mbiki or Musa ibn Malik, an Arab trader who first visited the island and later lived there. The island town was the capital of the Portuguese colony until 1898, when it was moved south to Loureiro Marques, now Maputo.
History. Bantu migrations.
Bantu-speaking peoples migrated into Mozambique as early as the 4th century BC. It is believed between the 1st and 5th centuries AD, waves of migration from the west and north went through the Zambezi River Valley and then gradually into the plateau and coastal areas of southern Africa. They established agricultural communities or societies based on herding cattle. They brought with them the technology for smelting and smithing iron.
Swahili coast.
From the late 1st millennium AD, vast Indian Ocean trade networks extended as far south into Mozambique as evidenced by the ancient port town of Chibuene. Beginning in the 9th century, a growing involvement in Indian Ocean trade led to the development of numerous port towns along the entire East African coast, including modern-day Mozambique. Largely autonomous, these towns broadly participated in the incipient Swahili culture. Islam was often adopted by urban elites, facilitating trade. In Mozambique, Sofala, Angoche, and Mozambique Island were regional powers by the 15th century. The towns traded with merchants from both the African interior and the broader Indian Ocean world. Particularly important were the gold and ivory caravan routes. Inland states like the Kingdom of Zimbabwe and Kingdom of Mutapa provided the coveted gold and ivory, which were then exchanged up the coast to larger port cities like Kilwa and Mombasa.
Portuguese Mozambique, 14,981,975.
The island of Mozambique, after which the country is named, is a small coral island at the mouth of Mossorol Bay on the Nacala coast of northern Mozambique, first explored by Europeans in the late 15th century. When Portuguese explorers reached Mozambique in 1498, Arab trading settlements had existed along the coast and outlying islands for several centuries. From about 1500, Portuguese trading posts and forts displaced the Arabic commercial and military hegemony, becoming regular ports of call on the new European sea route to the east, the first steps in what was to become a process of colonization. The voyage of Vasco da Gama around the Cape of Good Hope in 1498 marked the Portuguese entry into trade, politics, and society of the region. The Portuguese gained control of the island of Mozambique and the port city of Sofala in the early 16th century, and by the 1530s, small groups of Portuguese traders and prospectors seeking gold penetrated the interior regions, where they set up garrisons and trading posts at Sena and Tete on the Zambezi and tried to gain exclusive control over the gold trade. In the central part of the Mozambique territory, the Portuguese attempted to legitimize and consolidate their trade and settlement positions through the creation of prezos. These land grants tied emigrants to their settlements, and inland Mozambique was largely left to be administered by prezeiros, the grant holders, while central authorities in Portugal concentrated their direct exercise of power on, in their view, the more important Portuguese possessions in Asia and the Americas. Slavery in Mozambique predated European contact. African rulers and chiefs dealt in enslaved people, first with Arab Muslim traders, who sent the enslaved to Middle East Asia cities and plantations, and later with Portuguese and other European traders. In a continuation of the trade, slaves were supplied by warring local African rulers, who raided enemy tribes and sold their captives to the prezeiros. The authority of the prezeiros was exercised and upheld amongst the local population by armies of these enslaved men, whose members became known as chikunda. Continuing emigration from Portugal occurred at comparatively low levels until late in the 19th century, promoting Africanization. While prezos were originally intended to be held solely by Portuguese colonists, through intermarriage and the relative isolation of prezeiros from ongoing Portuguese influences, the prezos became African Portuguese or African Indian. Although Portuguese influence gradually expanded, its power was limited and exercised through individual settlers and officials who were granted extensive autonomy. The Portuguese were able to wrest much of the coastal trade from Arab Muslims between 1500 and 1700, but, with the Arab Muslim seizure of Portugal's key foothold at Fort Jesus on Mombasa Island, now in Kenya, in 1698, the pendulum began to swing in the other direction. As a result, investment lagged while Lisbon devoted itself to the more lucrative trade with India and the Far East and to the colonization of Brazil. The Mazrui and Omani Arabs reclaimed much of the Indian Ocean trade, forcing the Portuguese to retreat south. Many prezos had declined by the mid-19th century, but several of them survived. During the 19th century, other European powers, particularly the British South Africa Company, and the French, Madagascar, became increasingly involved in the trade and politics of the region around the Portuguese East African territories. By the early 20th century, the Portuguese had shifted the administration of much of Mozambique to large private companies, like the Mozambique Company, the Zambezia Company and the Niassa Company, controlled and financed mostly by British financiers such as Solomon Joel, which established railroad lines to their neighbouring colonies, South Africa and Rhodesia. Although slavery had been legally abolished in Mozambique, at the end of the 19th century the chartered companies enacted a forced labour policy and supplied cheap, often forced African labour to the mines and plantations of the nearby British colonies and South Africa. The Zambezia Company, the most profitable chartered company, took over several smaller prezeiro holdings and established military outposts to protect its property. The chartered companies built roads and ports to bring the goods to market, including a railroad linking present-day Zimbabwe with the Mozambican port of Beira. Due to their unsatisfactory performance and the shift, under the corporatist Estado Novo regime of Oliveira Salazar, toward a stronger Portuguese control of Portuguese Empire's economy, the company's concessions were not renewed when they ran out. This was what happened in 1942 with the Mozambique Company, which, however, continued to operate in the agricultural and commercial sectors as a corporation, and had already happened in 1929 with the termination of the Niassa Company's concession. In 1951, the Portuguese overseas colonies in Africa were rebranded as Overseas Provinces of Portugal. The Mueda massacre of 16 June 1960 resulted in the death of Makonde protesters, which provoked the struggle of independence from Portuguese rule of Mozambique.
Mozambican War of Independence, 19,641,975.
As communist and anti-colonial ideologies spread out across Africa, many clandestine political movements were established in support of Mozambican independence. These movements claimed that since policies and development plans were primarily designed by the ruling authorities for the benefit of Mozambique's Portuguese population, little attention was paid to Mozambique's tribal integration and the development of its native communities. According to the official guerrilla statements, this affected a majority of the indigenous population who suffered both state-sponsored discrimination and enormous social pressure. Many felt they had received too little opportunity or resources to upgrade their skills and improve their economic and social situation to a degree comparable to that of the Europeans. Statistically, Mozambique's Portuguese whites were indeed wealthier and more skilled than the black indigenous majority. As a response to the guerrilla movement, the Portuguese government from the 1960s and principally the early 1970s initiated gradual changes with new socio-economic developments and egalitarian policies. The Front for the Liberation of Mozambique, FRELIMO, initiated a guerrilla campaign against Portuguese rule in September 1964. This conflict, along with the two others already initiated in the other Portuguese colonies of Angola and Portuguese Guinea, became part of the so-called Portuguese Colonial War, 19,611,974. From a military standpoint, the Portuguese regular army maintained control of the population centers while the guerrilla forces sought to undermine their influence in rural and tribal areas in the north and west. As part of their response to FRELIMO, the Portuguese government began to pay more attention to creating favorable conditions for social development and economic growth.
Independence, 1975.
Frelimo took control of the territory after 10 years of sporadic warfare, as well as Portugal's own return to democracy after the fall of the authoritarian Estado Novo regime in the Carnation Revolution of April 1974 and the failed coup of 25 November 1975. Within a year, most of the 250,000 Portuguese in Mozambique had left, some expelled by the government of the nearly independent territory. Some left the country to avoid possible reprisals from the unstable government, and Mozambique became independent from Portugal on 25 June 1975. A law had been passed on the initiative of the relatively unknown Armando Guebuza of the FRELIMO party, ordering the Portuguese to leave the country in 24 hours with only 20 kilograms (44 pounds) of luggage. Unable to salvage any of their assets, most of them returned to Portugal penniless.
Mozambican Civil War, 19,771,992.
The new government under President Samora Machel established a one-party state based on Marxist principles. It received diplomatic and some military support from Cuba and the Soviet Union and proceeded to crack down on opposition. Starting shortly after independence, the country was plagued from 1977 to 1992 by a long and violent civil war between the opposition forces of anti-communist Mozambican National Resistance, RENAMO, rebel militias and the FRELIMO regime. This conflict characterized the first decades of Mozambican independence, combined with sabotage from the neighboring states of Rhodesia and South Africa, ineffective policies, failed central planning, and the resulting economic collapse. This period was also marked by the exodus of Portuguese nationals and Mozambicans of Portuguese heritage, a collapsed infrastructure, lack of investment in productive assets, and government nationalization of privately owned industries, as well as widespread famine. During most of the Civil War, the FRELIMO formed central government was unable to exercise effective control outside urban areas, many of which were cut off from the capital. RENAMO controlled areas included up to 50% of the rural areas in several provinces, and it is reported that health services of any kind were isolated from assistance for years in those areas. The problem worsened when the government cut back spending on healthcare. The war was marked by mass human rights violations from both sides of the conflict, with both RENAMO and FRELIMO contributing to the chaos through the use of terror and indiscriminate targeting of civilians. The central government executed tens of thousands of people while trying to extend its control throughout the country and sent many people to re-education camps, where thousands died. During the war, RENAMO proposed a peace agreement based on the secession of RENAMO-controlled northern and western territories as the independent Republic of Rhodesia, but FRELIMO refused, insisting on the undivided sovereignty of the entire country. An estimated 1 million Mozambicans perished during the civil war, 1.7 million took refuge in neighboring states, and several million more were internally displaced. The FRELIMO regime also gave shelter and support to South African National Congress, and Zimbabwe African National Union, rebel movements, while the governments of Rhodesia and later apartheid South Africa backed RENAMO in the civil war. Between 300,000 and 600,000 people died of famine during the war. On 19 October 1986, Michel was on his way back from an international meeting in Zambia in the presidential Tupolev Tu-134 aircraft when the plane crashed in the Lubombo Mountains near Mbuzini in the Mpumalanga region of apartheid-ruling South Africa. There were 10 survivors, but President Michel and 33 others died, including ministers and officials of the Mozambique government. The United Nations Soviet delegation issued a minority report contending that their expertise and experience had been undermined by the South Africans. Representatives of the Soviet Union advanced the theory that the plane had been intentionally diverted by a false navigational beacon signal, using a technology provided by military intelligence operatives of the South African government. Michel's successor Joaquim Chissano implemented sweeping changes in the country, starting reforms such as changing from Marxism to capitalism, and began peace talks with RENAMO. The new constitution enacted in 1990 provided for a multi-party political system, market-based economy, and free elections. The civil war ended in October 1992 with the Rome General Peace Accords, first brokered by the Christian Council of Mozambique, Council of Protestant Churches, and then taken over by Community of Sant'Egidio. Peace returned to Mozambique, under the supervision of the peacekeeping force of the United Nations.
Democratic era, 1993–present.
Mozambique held elections in 1994, which were accepted by most political parties as free and fair, although still contested by many nationals and observers alike. FRELIMO won, under Joaquim Chissano, while RENAMO, led by Afonso Dhlakama, ran as the official opposition. In 1995, Mozambique joined the Commonwealth of Nations, becoming, at the time, the only member nation that had never been part of the British Empire. By mid-1995, over 1.7 million refugees who had sought asylum in neighboring countries had returned to Mozambique, part of the largest repatriation witnessed in sub-Saharan Africa. An additional 4 million internally displaced persons had returned to their homes. In December 1999, Mozambique held elections for a second time since the Civil War, which were again won by FRELIMO. RENAMO accused FRELIMO of fraud and threatened to return to civil war, but backed down after taking the matter to the Supreme Court and losing. In early 2000, a cyclone caused widespread flooding, killing hundreds and devastating the already precarious infrastructure. There were widespread suspicions that foreign aid resources had been diverted by powerful leaders of FRELIMO. Carlos Cardoso, a journalist investigating these allegations, was murdered, and his death was never satisfactorily explained. Indicating in 2001 that he would not run for a third term, Chissano criticized leaders who stayed on longer than he had, which was generally seen as a reference to Zambian President Frederick Chiluba, who at the time was considering a third term, and Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe, then in his fourth term. Presidential and National Assembly elections took place on 12 December 2004. FRELIMO candidate Armando Guebuza won with 64% of the popular vote, and Dhlakama received 32% of the popular vote. FRELIMO won 160 seats in parliament, with a coalition of RENAMO and several small parties winning the 90 remaining seats. Guebuza was inaugurated as the President of Mozambique on 2 February 2005 and served 2 5-year terms. His successor, Felipe Nyusi, became the 4th President of Mozambique on 15 January 2015. From 2013 to 2019, a low-intensity insurgency by RENAMO occurred, mainly in the country's central and northern regions. On 5 September 2014, Guebuza and Dhlakama signed the Accord on Cessation of Hostilities, which brought the military hostilities to a halt and allowed both parties to concentrate on the general elections to be held in October 2014. However, after the general elections, a new political crisis emerged. RENAMO did not recognize the validity of the election results and demanded the control of 6 provinces: Nampula, Niassa, Tete, Zambezia, Sofala, and Manica, where they claimed to have won a majority. About 12,000 refugees fled to Malawi. The UNHCR, Doctors Without Borders, and Human Rights Watch reported that government forces had torched villages and carried out summary executions and sexual abuses. In October 2019, President Felipe Nyusi was re-elected after a landslide victory in general election. FRELIMO won 184 seats, RENAMO got 60 seats and the MDM party received the remaining 6 seats in the National Assembly. Opposition did not accept the results because of allegations of fraud and irregularities. FRELIMO secured 2/3 majority in parliament, which allowed FRELIMO to readjust the constitution without needing the agreement of the opposition. Since 2017, the country has faced an ongoing insurgency by Islamist groups. In September 2020, ISIL insurgents captured and briefly occupied Vamizi Island in the Indian Ocean. In March 2021, dozens of civilians were killed and 35,000 others were displaced after Islamist rebels seized the city of Palma. In December 2021, nearly 4,000 Mozambicans fled their villages after an intensification of jihadist attacks in Niassa.
Geography.
At 309,475 square miles, 801,537 square kilometers, Mozambique is the world's 35th largest country. Mozambique is located on the southeast coast of Africa and is bound by Eswatini to the south, South Africa to the southwest, Zimbabwe to the west, Zambia and Malawi to the northwest, Tanzania to the north and the Indian Ocean to the east. Mozambique lies between latitudes 10 and 27 s, and longitudes 30 and 41 e. The country is divided into 2 topographical regions by the Zambezi River. To the north of the Zambezi, the narrow coastal strip gives way to inland hills and low plateaus. Rugged highlands are further west. They include the Niassa Highlands, Namuli or Shire Highlands, Angonia Highlands, Tete Highlands and the Makonde Plateau, covered with Miombo woodlands. To the south of the Zambezi, the lowlands are broader with the Mashonaland Plateau and Lubombo Mountains located in the deep south. The country is drained by 5 principal rivers and several smaller ones, with the largest and most important the Zambezi. The country has 4 notable lakes: Lake Niassa, or Malawi, Lake Chiuta, Cahora Bassa and Lake Sherwa, all in the north. The major cities are Maputo, Beira, Nampula, Tete, Quelimane, Chimoio, Pemba, Inhambane, Zai Zai and Lichinga. Geography of Mozambique ******.
Climate.
Mozambique has a tropical climate with 2 seasons, a wet season from October to March and a dry season from April to September. Climatic conditions, however, vary depending on altitude. Rainfall is heavy along the coast and decreases in the north and south. Annual precipitation varies from 500 to 900 mm, 19.7 to 35.4 in, depending on the region, with an average of 590 mm, 23.2 in. Cyclones are common during the wet season. Average temperature ranges in Maputo are from 13 to 24 C, 55.4 to 75.2 F, in July and from 22 to 31 C, 71.6 to 87.8 F, in February. In 2019, Mozambique suffered floods and destruction from the devastating cyclones Idai and Kenneth, the first time 2 cyclones had struck the nation in a single season. Thousands of crops were destroyed during the flooding, which causes transboundary animal diseases, and over 10 million people were affected throughout the region, according to the FAO's Urgent Campaign for Southern Africa, which includes Malawi, Madagascar, and Mozambique. These countries have been experiencing climate disasters between January and March 2023 that have seriously affected various sectors, including farming, fisheries, and thousands of crops.
Wildlife.
There are known to be 740 bird species in Mozambique, including 20 globally threatened species and 2 introduced species, and over 200 mammal species endemic to Mozambique, including the critically endangered Selous zebra, Vincent's bush squirrel and 13 other endangered or vulnerable species. Protected areas include 13 forest reserves, 7 national parks, 6 nature reserves, 3 frontier conservation areas and 3 wildlife or game reserves. The country had a 2019 Forest Landscape Integrity Index mean score of 6.93/10, ranking it 62nd globally out of 172 countries.
Politics.
The Constitution of Mozambique stipulates that the President of the Republic functions as the head of state, head of government, commander-in-chief of the armed forces, and as a symbol of national unity. He is directly elected for a 5-year term via runoff voting. If no candidate receives more than half of the votes cast in the first round of voting, a second round of voting will be held in which only the 2 candidates who received the highest number of votes in the first round will participate, and whichever of the candidates obtains a majority of votes in the second round will thus be elected president. The Prime Minister is appointed by the President. His functions include convening and chairing the Council of Ministers, Cabinet, advising the President, assisting the President in governing the country, and coordinating the functions of the other ministers. The Assembly of the Republic, Assembleia da República, has 250 members, elected for a 5-year term by proportional representation. The judiciary comprises a Supreme Court and provincial, district, and municipal courts. Mozambique operates a small, functioning military that handles all aspects of domestic national defense, the Mozambique Defense Armed Forces.
Foreign relations.
While allegiances dating back to the liberation struggle remain relevant, Mozambique's foreign policy has become increasingly pragmatic. The twin pillars of Mozambique's foreign policy are maintenance of good relations with its neighbors and maintenance and expansion of ties to development partners. During the 1970s and the early 1980s, Mozambique's foreign policy was inextricably linked to the struggles for majority rule in Rhodesia and South Africa as well as superpower competition and the Cold War. Mozambique's decision to enforce UN sanctions against Rhodesia and deny that country access to the sea led Ian Smith's government to undertake overt and covert actions to oppose the country. Although the change of government in Zimbabwe in 1980 removed this threat, the government of South Africa continued to destabilize Mozambique. Mozambique also belonged to the frontline states. The 1984 Nkomati Accord, while failing in its goal of ending South African support to RENAMO, opened initial diplomatic contacts between the Mozambican and South African governments. This process gained momentum with South Africa's elimination of apartheid, which culminated in the establishment of full diplomatic relations in October 1993. While relations with neighboring Zimbabwe, Malawi, Zambia and Tanzania show occasional strains, Mozambique's ties to these countries remained strong. In the years immediately following its independence, Mozambique benefited from considerable assistance from some Western countries, notably the Scandinavians. The Soviet Union and its allies became Mozambique's primary economic, military and political supporters, and its foreign policy reflected this linkage. This began to change in 1983. In 1984, Mozambique joined the World Bank and International Monetary Fund. Western aid by the Scandinavian countries of Sweden, Norway, Denmark and Iceland quickly replaced Soviet support. Finland and the Netherlands are becoming increasingly important sources of development assistance. Italy also maintains a profile in Mozambique as a result of its key role during the peace process. Relations with Portugal, the former colonial power, continue to be important because Portuguese investors play a visible role in Mozambique's economy. Mozambique is a member of the Non-Aligned Movement and ranks among the moderate members of the African Bloc in the United Nations and other international organizations. Mozambique also belongs to the African Union and the Southern African Development Community. In 1994, the government became a full member of the Organization of the Islamic Conference, in part to broaden its base of international support but also to please the country's sizable Muslim population. Similarly, in 1995 Mozambique joined its Anglophone neighbors in the Commonwealth of Nations. At the time it was the only nation to have joined the Commonwealth that was never part of the British Empire. In the same year, Mozambique became a founding member and the first president of the Community of Portuguese-language countries and maintains close ties with other Portuguese-speaking countries.
Human rights.
Same-sex sexual activity has been legal since 2015. However, discrimination against LGBT people in Mozambique is widespread.
Administrative divisions.
Mozambique is divided into 10 provinces, provincias, and one capital city, Cidade Capital, with provincial status. The provinces are subdivided into 129 districts, distritos. The districts are further divided into 405, postos administrativos, administrative posts, headed by secretarios, and then into localidades, localities, the lowest geographical level of the central state administration. There are 53 municípios, municipalities.
Economy.
Mozambique is one of the poorest and most underdeveloped countries in the world, even though between 1994 and 2006 its average annual GDP growth was approximately 8%. The IMF classifies Mozambique as a heavily indebted poor country. In a 2006 survey, 3/4 of Mozambicans said that in the past 5 years their economic position had remained the same or become worse. Mozambique was ranked 126th out of 132 in the Global Innovation Index in 2023. Mozambique's official currency is the metical. As of October 2023, $1 is roughly equivalent to 64 meticals. The US dollar, South African rand, and the euro are widely accepted and used in business transactions. The minimum legal salary is around $60 per month. Mozambique is a member of the Southern African Development Community, SADC. The SADC Free Trade Protocol is aimed at making the Southern African region more competitive by eliminating tariffs and other trade barriers. The World Bank in 2007 talked of Mozambique's blistering pace of economic growth. A joint donor-government study in early 2007 said, Mozambique is generally considered an aid success story.
Rebounding growth.
The resettlement of Civil War refugees and successful economic reform have led to a high growth rate. The country enjoyed a remarkable recovery, achieving an average annual rate of economic growth of 8% between 1996 and 2006 and between 67% from 2006 to 2011. Rapid expansion in the future hinges on several major foreign investment projects, continued economic reform, and the revival of the agriculture, transportation, and tourism sectors. In 2013 about 80% of the population was employed in agriculture, the majority of whom were engaged in small-scale subsistence farming which still suffered from inadequate infrastructure, commercial networks, and investment. However, in 2012, more than 90% of Mozambique's arable land was still uncultivated. In 2013, a BBC article reported that starting in 2009, the Portuguese had been returning to Mozambique because of the growing economy in Mozambique and the poor economic situation in Portugal.
Economic reforms.
More than 1,200 mostly small state-owned enterprises have been privatized. Preparations for privatization and/or sector liberalization were made for the remaining parastatal enterprises, including telecommunications, energy, ports, and railways. The government frequently selected a strategic foreign investor when privatizing a parastatal. Additionally, customs duties have been reduced, and customs management has been streamlined and reformed. The government introduced a value-added tax in 1999 as part of its efforts to increase domestic revenues.
Corruption.
Mozambique's economy has been shaken by numerous corruption scandals. In July 2011, the government proposed new anti-corruption laws to criminalize embezzlement, influence peddling and graft, following numerous instances of the theft of public money. This has been endorsed by the country's Council of Ministers. Mozambique convicted 2 former ministers for graft. Mozambique was ranked 116 of 178 countries in anti-graft watchdog Transparency International's Index of Global Corruption. According to a USAID report written in 2005, the scale and scope of corruption in Mozambique are cause for alarm. In 2012, the government of Inhambane province uncovered the misappropriation of public funds by the director of the provincial anti-drugs office, Callisto Alberto Tomo. He was found to have colluded with the accountant in the anti-drugs office, Recalde Gwambe, to steal over 260,000 metase between 2008 and 2010. The government of Mozambique has taken steps to address the problem of corruption, and some positive developments can be observed, such as the passages of several anti-corruption bills in 2012.
Natural resources.
In 20,102,011, Anadarko Petroleum and Eni discovered the Mamba South gas field, recoverable reserves of 4,200 billion cubic meters, 150 trillion cubic feet, of natural gas in the Rovuma Basin, off the coast of northern Cabo Delgado province. Once developed, this could make Mozambique one of the largest producers of liquefied natural gas in the world. In January 2017, 3 firms were selected by the government for the natural gas development projects in the Rovuma gas basin. GL Africa Energy, UK, was awarded one of the tenders. It plans to build and operate a 250 MW gas-powered plant. Production was scheduled to start in 2018. Mozambique is now scheduled to begin exporting LNG globally in 2024. In 2019, developments in the Rovuma Basin, referred to as the Mozambique LNG project, raised $19 billion from a consortium of investors to finally bring this LNG to market. The majority of the project and its associated operations have been awarded to the company, Total Energies.
Tourism.
The country's natural environment, wildlife, and historic heritage provide opportunities for beach, cultural, and eco-tourism. Mozambique has a great potential for growth in its gross domestic product, GDP. The North beaches with clean water are suitable for tourism, especially those that are very far from urban centers, such the Quirimbas Islands and the archipelago of Bazaruto. The Inhambane province attracts international divers because of the marine biodiversity and the presence of whale sharks and manta rays. There are several national parks, including Gorongosa National Park.
Transport.
There are over 30,000 kilometers, 19,000 miles, of roads, but much of the network is unpaved. Like its Commonwealth neighbors, traffic circulates on the left. There is an international airport at Maputo, 21 other paved airports, and over 100 airstrips with unpaved runways. There are 3,750 kilometers of navigable inland waterways. There are rail links serving principal cities and connecting the country with Malawi, Zimbabwe and South Africa. The Mozambican railway system developed over more than a century from 3 different ports on the coast that served as terminals for separate lines to the hinterland. The railroads were major targets during the Mozambican Civil War, were sabotaged by RENAMO, and are being rehabilitated. A parastatal authority, Portos e Caminos de Ferro de Moambique, Mozambique Ports and Railways, oversees the railway system and its connected ports, but management has been largely outsourced. Each line has its own development corridor. As of 2005 there were 3,123 kilometers of railway track, consisting of 2,983 kilometers of 1,067 millimeters, 3 feet 6 in, gauge, compatible with neighboring rail systems, and the 140 kilometers line of 762 millimeters, 2 feet 6 in, gauge, the Gaza Railway. The Central Beira-Bulawayo Railway and Sennar Railway route links the port of Beira to the landlocked countries of Malawi, Zambia and Zimbabwe. To the north of this the port of Nacala is also linked by Nacala Rail to Malawi, and to the south the port of Maputo is connected by the Limpopo Rail, the Goba Rail and the Ressano Garcia Rail to Zimbabwe, Eswatini and South Africa. These networks interconnect only via neighboring countries. A new route for coal haulage between Tete and Beira was planned to come into service by 2010, and in August 2010, Mozambique and Botswana signed a Memorandum of Understanding to develop a 1,100 km railway through Zimbabwe, to carry coal from Serral in Botswana to a deep-water port at Tekobanine Point. Newer rolling stock has been supplied by the Indian Golden Rock Workshop using center buffer couplers and air brakes.
Water supply and sanitation.
Water supply and sanitation in Mozambique is characterized by low levels of access to an improved water source, estimated to be 51% in 2011, Low levels of access to adequate sanitation, estimated to be 25% in 2011, and mostly poor service quality. In 2007, the government defined a strategy for water supply and sanitation in rural areas, where 62% of the population lives. In urban areas, water is supplied by informal small-scale providers and by formal providers. Beginning in 1998, Mozambique reformed the formal part of the urban water supply sector through the creation of an independent regulatory agency called CIA, an asset holding company called FIPAG and a public-private partnership, PPP, with a company called Aguas de Moambique. The PPP covered those areas of the capital and of 4 other cities that had access to formal water supply systems. However, the PPP ended when the management contracts for 4 cities expired in 2008 and when the foreign partner of the company that serves the capital under a lease contract withdrew in 2010, claiming heavy losses. While urban water supply has received considerable policy attention, the government has no strategy for urban sanitation yet. External donors finance about 87.4% of all public investments in the sector.
Demographics.
The north-central provinces of Zambezia and Nampula are the most populous, with about 45% of the population. The estimated 4 million Makua are the dominant group in the northern part of the country. The Sena and Shona, mostly in Dao, are prominent in the Zambezi Valley, and the Songa and Shangaan people dominate southern Mozambique. Other groups include Makonde, Yao, Swahili, Tonga, Chopi, and Nguni, including Zulu. Bantu people comprise 97.8% of the population, with the rest made up of Portuguese ancestry, Euro-Africans, Mesho people of mixed Bantu and Portuguese ancestry, and Indians. Roughly 45,000 people of Indian descent reside in Mozambique. During Portuguese colonial rule, a large minority of people of Portuguese descent lived permanently in almost all areas of the country, and Mozambicans with Portuguese heritage at the time of independence numbered about 360,000. Many of these left the country after independence from Portugal in 1975. There are various estimates for the size of Mozambique's Chinese community, ranging from 7,000 to 12,000 as of 2007. According to a 2011 survey, the total fertility rate was 5.9 children per woman, with 6.6 in rural areas and 4.5 in urban areas.
Languages.
Portuguese is the official and most widely spoken language of the nation, spoken by 50.3% of the population. The Bantu group languages that are indigenous to the country vary greatly in their groupings and in some cases are rather poorly appreciated and documented. Apart from its lingua franca uses in the north of the country, Swahili is spoken in a small area of the coast next to the Tanzanian border. South of this, towards Moambique Island, Kimwani, regarded as a dialect of Swahili, is used. Immediately inland of the Swahili area, Makonde is used, separated farther inland by a small strip of Makua-speaking territory from an area where Yao or Chi Yao is used. Makonde and Yao belong to a different group, Yao being very close to the Mwera language of the Rondo Plateau area in Tanzania. Prepositions appear in these languages as locative prefixes prefixed to the noun and declined according to their own noun class. Some Nyanja is used at the coast of Lake Malawi, as well as on the other side of the lake. Somewhat different from all of these are the languages of the Makua group, with a loss of initial K, which means that many nouns begin with a vowel. For example, epula equals rain. There is Makua proper, with the related Elamwe and Echuabo, with a small Lakoti speaking area at the coast. In an area straddling the lower Zambezi, Sena, which belongs to the same group as Nyanja, is spoken, with areas speaking the related Ci Nyungwe and Sisinga further upriver. A large Shona-speaking area extends between the Zimbabwe border and the sea. This was formerly known as the Ndau variety but now uses the orthography of the standard Shona of Zimbabwe. Apparently similar to Shona, but lacking the tone patterns of the Shona language, and regarded by its speakers as quite separate, is C. Bulka, also called Ru or Bawe, used in a small area near the Zimbabwe border. South of this area are languages of the Songa group. Shi Swa or Swa occurs at the coast and inland. Shi Songa or Songa straddles the area around the Limpopo River, including such local dialects as Silinganu, Shinwalungu, Shi Bila, Exalengwe, and Shi Jonga. This language area extends into neighboring South Africa. Still related to these, but distinct, are Gatonga, Baitonga, and C. Kopi or Chopi, spoken north of the mouth of the Limpopo, and Shi Ronga or Ronga, spoken in the immediate region around Maputo. The languages in this group are, judging by the short vocabularies, very vaguely similar to Zulu, but obviously not in the same immediate group. There are small Swazi and Zulu-speaking areas in Mozambique immediately next to the Swaziland and KwaZulu-Natal borders. Arabs, Chinese, and Indians primarily speak Portuguese and some Hindi. Indians from Portuguese India speak any of the Portuguese Creoles of their origin aside from Portuguese as their second language.
Religion.
The 2007 census found that Christians made up 59.2% of Mozambique's population, Muslims comprised 18.9% of the population, 7.3% of the people held other beliefs, mainly animism, and 13.9% had no religious beliefs. A more recent government survey conducted by the Demographic and Health Surveys Program in 2015 indicated that Catholicism had increased to 30.5% of the population, Muslims constituted 19.3%, and various Protestant groups a total of 44%. According to 2018 estimates from the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, 28% of the population is Catholic, 18% are Muslim, mostly Sunni, 15% are Zionist Christians, 12% are Protestants, 7% are members of other religious groups, and 18% have no religion. The Catholic Church has established 12 dioceses: Beira, Chimoio, Guru, Inhambane, Lichinga, Maputo, Nacala, Nampula, Pemba, Quelimane, Tete, and Zari-Zai. Archdioceses are Beira, Maputo and Nampula. Statistics for the dioceses range from a low 5.8% Catholics in the population in the Diocese of Chimoio, to 32.50% in Quelimane Diocese, Anuario Católico de Mocambique. Among the main Protestant denominations are Igreja Unio Baptista de Moambique, the Assembleias de Deus, the Seventh-day Adventists, the Anglican Church of Southern Africa, the Igreja de Evangelho Completo de Deus, the Igreja Metodista Unida, the Igreja Presbiteriana de Moambique, the Igrejas de Cristo and the Assembleia Evangélica de Deus. The work of Methodism in Mozambique started in 1890. Owen Richards began a Methodist mission at Chicuquin in Inhambane Province. The Igreja Metodista Unida em Moambique, United Methodist Church in Mozambique, observed the 100th anniversary of Methodist presence in Mozambique in 1990. President Chissano praised the work and role of the UMC to more than 10,000 people who attended the ceremony. The United Methodist Church has tripled in size in Mozambique since 1998. There are more than 150,000 members in more than 180 congregations of the 24 districts. New pastors are ordained each year. New churches are chartered each year in each annual conference, North and South. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has established a growing presence. It first began sending missionaries to Mozambique in 1999, and, as of April 2015, has more than 7,943 members. The Bahá'í faith has been present in Mozambique since the early 1950s but did not openly identify itself in those years because of the strong influence of the Catholic Church, which did not recognize it officially as a world religion. The independence in 1975 saw the entrance of new pioneers. In total, there are about 3,000 declared Bahá'ís as of 2010. Muslims are particularly present in the north of the country. They are organized in several, tarika, or brotherhoods. Two national organizations also exist: the Conselho Ilmico de Moambique and the Congresso Ilmico de Moambique. There are also important Pakistani, Indian associations as well as some Shia communities. There is a very small but thriving Jewish community in Maputo.
Health.
The fertility rate is at about 5.5 births per woman. Public expenditure on health was at 2.7% of the GDP in 2004, whereas private expenditure on health was at 1.3% in the same year. Health expenditure per capita was $42 PPP, in 2004. In the early 21st century there were 3 physicians per 100,000 people in the country. Infant mortality was at 100 per 1,000 births in 2005. The 2010 maternal mortality rate per 100,000 births for Mozambique is 550. This is compared with 598.8 in 2008 and 385 in 1990. The under 5 mortality rate, per 1,000 births is 147 and the neonatal mortality as a percentage of under 5's mortality is 29. In Mozambique the number of midwives per 1,000 live births is 3 and the lifetime risk of death for pregnant women 1 in 37. The official HIV prevalence in 2011 was 11.5% of the population aged between 15 and 49 years. In the southern parts of Mozambique, Maputo and Gaza provinces as well as the city of Maputo, official figures are more than twice as high as the national average. In 2011 the health authorities estimated about 1.7 million Mozambicans were HIV positive, of whom 600,000 were in need of antiretroviral treatment. As of December 2011, 240,000 were receiving such treatment, increasing to 416,000 in March 2014 according to the health authorities.
Education.
Portuguese is the primary language of instruction in all Mozambican schools. All Mozambicans are required by law to attend school through the primary level. However, a lot of children do not go to primary school because they have to work for their family's subsistence farms for a living. In 2007, 1 million children still did not go to school, most of them from poor rural families, and almost half of all teachers were unqualified. Girls' enrollment increased from 3 million in 2002 to 4.1 million in 2006, while the completion rate increased from 31,000 to 90,000, which testified a very poor completion rate. After grade 7, pupils must take standardized national exams to enter secondary school, which runs from 8th to 10th grade. Space in Mozambican universities is extremely limited. Thus most pupils who complete pre-university school do not immediately proceed on to university studies. Many go to work as teachers or are unemployed. There are also institutes that give more vocational training, specializing in agricultural, technical or pedagogical studies, which students may attend after grade 10 in lieu of a pre-university school. After independence from Portugal in 1975, a number of Mozambican pupils continued to be admitted every year at Portuguese high schools, polytechnical institutes and universities, through bilateral agreements between the Portuguese government and the Mozambican government. According to 2010 estimates, the literacy rate was 56.1%, 70.8% male and 42.8% female. By 2015, this had increased to 58.8%, 73.3% male and 45.4% female.
Culture.
Mozambique was ruled by Portugal, and they share a main language, Portuguese, and main religion, Roman Catholicism. But since most of the people of Mozambique are Bantus, most of the culture is native. For Bantus living in urban areas, there is some Portuguese influence. Mozambican culture also influences the Portuguese culture.
Arts.
The Makonde are known for their wood carving and elaborate masks, which are commonly used in traditional dances. There are two different kinds of wood carvings: Shetani, evil spirits, which are mostly carved in heavy ebony, tall, and elegantly curved with symbols and non-representational faces, and Ujamaa, which are totem-type carvings which illustrate lifelike faces of people and various figures. These sculptures are usually referred to as family trees, because they tell stories of many generations. During the last years of the colonial period, Mozambican art reflected the oppression by the colonial power and became a symbol of resistance. After independence in 1975, modern art came into a new phase. The two best-known and most influential contemporary Mozambican artists are the painter Malangatana Ngwenya and the sculptor Alberto Chissano. A lot of the post-independence art during the 1980s and 1990s reflect the political struggle, civil war, suffering, starvation, and struggle. Dances are usually intricate, highly developed traditions throughout Mozambique. There are many different kinds of dances from tribe to tribe which are usually ritualistic in nature. The Chopi, for instance, act out battles dressed in animal skins. The men of Makua dress in colorful outfits and masks while dancing on stilts around the village for hours. Groups of women in the northern part of the country perform a traditional dance called Tufo, to celebrate Islamic holidays.
Cuisine.
With a nearly 500-year presence in the country, the Portuguese have greatly influenced Mozambique's cuisine. Staples and crops such as cassava, a starchy root of Brazilian origin, and cashew nuts, also of Brazilian origin, though Mozambique was once the largest producer of these nuts, and pozinho, pronounced pwzu, Portuguese-style buns, were brought in by the Portuguese. The use of spices and seasonings such as bay leaves, chili peppers, fresh coriander, garlic, onions, paprika, red sweet peppers, and wine were introduced by the Portuguese, as were maize, potatoes, rice, and sugarcane. Espetada, the popular inteiro com piri-piri, whole chicken in piri-piri sauce, prego, steak roll, pudim, pudding, and rissus, battered shrimp, are all Portuguese dishes commonly eaten in present-day Mozambique.
Media.
Mozambican media is heavily influenced by the government. Newspapers have relatively low circulation rates because of high newspaper prices and low literacy rates. Among the most highly circulated newspapers are state-controlled dailies, such as Noticias and Diário de Moambique, and the weekly Domingo. Their circulation is mostly confined to Maputo. Most funding and advertising revenue is given to pro-government newspapers. Radio programs are the most influential form of media in the country because of ease of access. State-owned radio stations are more popular than privately owned media. This is exemplified by the government radio station, Radio Moambique, the most popular station in the country. It was established shortly after Mozambique's independence. The television stations watched by Mozambicans are STV, TIM, and TVM Televisão Moambique. Through cable and satellite, viewers can access tens of other African, Asian, Brazilian, and European channels.
Music.
The music of Mozambique serves many purposes, ranging from religious expression to traditional ceremonies. Musical instruments are usually handmade. Some of the instruments used in Mozambican musical expression include drums made of wood and animal skin, the lupembe, a woodwind instrument made from animal horns or wood, and the marimba, which is a kind of xylophone native to Mozambique and other parts of Africa. The marimba is a popular instrument with the Chopi of the south-central coast, who are famous for their musical skill and dance.
National holidays. Sport.
Football, Portuguese, futebol, is the most popular sport in Mozambique. The national team is the Mozambique national football team. Track and field and basketball are also avidly followed in the country. Roller hockey is popular, and the best result for the national team was when they came in fourth at the 2011 FIRS Roller Hockey World Cup. The women's beach volleyball team finished second at the 20,182,020 CAVB Beach Volleyball Continental Cup. The Mozambique national cricket team represents the nation in international cricket.